Hello and welcome to the 14th episode of my podcast Historians in Conversation, which is hosted by the University of Lodz in Poland. My name is Michael Green and I am the University Professor at the University of Lodz. My guest today is Dr. Henning Jürgens, who is working at the Leibniz Institute for European History in Mainz as a historian occupying himself with religious history. He has been working extensively on various topics pertaining to the Reformation, and today we are going to discuss his motivation to study history, his very interesting and rather unique professional path, which is mostly possible in Germany. Henning is employed at a research institute, which does not entail teaching. I invite you to listen to this conversation, and I hope that you enjoy it. And now let me welcome Henning to the podcast. Hello, Henning. I'm very happy to have you here in my podcast. And I must say that Henning and I were working together for about 1.5 years at the Leibniz Institute for European History. So it's always a pleasure to talk to a person that I know and appreciate. Welcome, Henning.
Thank you for your welcome. I'm glad to be here. And it's quite a long time ago that you were at our institute. As far as I remember, it's almost like 10 years or so. But we have a common remembrance of that, and I think it was a good time at that time.
Definitely. Traditionally, I start my podcast with asking the very same question all of my guests. Could you tell a little bit about your childhood, about your family, about the place where you come from?
I was born in the place where my mother comes from. It's in Schleswig-Holstein, at the close to the Danish border in Germany, at the west coast to the North Sea. It's called Meldorf, but only my family lived there. I never lived there on my own because my mother went back to her family to give childbirth, and then I grew up in a small town called Selsingen, which is located between Hamburg and Bremen. So in this northern part of Germany, quite in the middle of nowhere, but it was a small place where my father was a pastor and my mother was a teacher. So I grew up in a very traditional family, so to say.
And probably very educated family.
Yes, education was very important. So in German, we have this nice word of Bildungsbürgertum, people who are putting lots of effort on education, on Bildung. And this is the way I grew up.
So I guess you did not learn Danish in your childhood, even though your mother is coming from that region.
No, not Danish, but actually, my grandfather was speaking Low German, and he was even thinking in Low German. And I learned to understand it, but I never dared to speak it. So I'm a passive, have passive ability in Low German and reading ability, but I'm not speaking it on my own. But actually, that's kind of a different language. So it was good to learn it by just listening to it from my grandparents and also from the people in the town I was growing up, because the whole region was Low German speaking territory.
What do you remember of your childhood? What was your childhood like?
I had a very protected childhood in this little place. We were 4 children, and we grew up with lots of freedoms in running around and going into the woods and whatever. I had many opportunities to read, and I was interested in many different things. I learned poems by heart. I read historical books, but also graphic novels, all kind of. My aunt, actually it was the aunt of my father, she was a professional in children's literature, and she always provided us with the newest books. And when my mother, as a teacher, was to teach books for children, she always used us as dummies, and we had to read them first. So I was always at the cutting edge of new children's literature at that time, especially on the topic of the Shoah. So I read all the books which came out in the mid-70s, which was a new kind of literature at that time, how Jews were treated in Germany. So we grew up with a special knowledge in this respect. Plus, we also had contacts from Western Germany to Eastern Germany. So when I was 10, I started to travel to the German Democratic Republic every year and meet friends there. And so my political development was really much influenced by that. This was a region which was quite remote from us, and no one of my schoolmates was interested in this topic, but for us it was important. We had our friends there, and we met people from the GDR on a day-to-day level, so to say, and this influenced me very much. So I decided to have political science as my major for my Abitur, for my high school graduation, and I did not think of taking history as a major at that time, but political science.
I think it's pretty interesting that, well, what you describe is a childhood that was shaped on the one hand by your parents, because they, of course, guided you towards reading and towards knowledge, acquiring knowledge, but also by the reality itself. And it's interesting also to see for me that you are very well aware of that environment. So you have already reflected on your childhood at some point. So it's going to be an interesting conversation, I think. But I have first a question about reading. You mentioned that you read a lot and a lot of different things. But if you speak about history, do you remember the first book that was really historical, that was interesting for you at that time?
Yes, I remember reading historical novels for children or even for grown-ups, like Walter Scott, the classics, or novels around biblical figures on David or Joseph. So this kind of stuff, and about Genghis Khan. So all kind of historical books for children I was really interested in, and it started with picture books and with basic information about the Romans, of course, and then about the Middle Ages and all kind of stuff. And then I proceeded to novels for children, and later on for grown-ups. But at some time I lost my interest in this novel dimension of history, and more concentrated on actually history books. But this was later on when I started to study.
And then, despite the fact that you liked history, you still chose to go for political science for your high school diploma. And why is that? Why not history? Why not theology? Because you also mentioned the theological dimension of the biblical figures.
I think it was dependent on the teachers I had. So I had a very charismatic teacher in political science, and the history teacher was fond of me, but I was not fond of him. So he tried to make me take history, but I did not want to do this path at that time. So it was a kind of personal decision. But then when I left school, I had to do my social service year. It was more than 1.5 years, and I went to Hamburg and went to
social service. If you could just explain what it is.
Yeah, it was a kind of instead of going to the army, which was obligatory at that time, one could choose to go to Zivildienst, civil service, and there were many different opportunities in like environmental care or going to a kindergarten or taking care of disabled persons, whatever. And I choose to go to a elderly people home and did work there for 18 months or so before I could start to study. So I was quite old. I was 21 when I started my studies at an age that nowadays people are already having their BA or even their MA. So, and during that time, I decided to switch from political science to history. So when I started to study, I choose history as my main subject and philosophy and theology as side subjects.
What university was that?
It was simply I found that it was more general to study history, and I guess my parents told me you can't go to a university without studying philosophy. So I did this as a side subject, and theology was always part of my interests, and of course there was the influence of my parents as well. But I was not able to do the whole subject. Theology is with all this biblical stuff and so on is too much as a side subject. So I decided to focus on church history. And but
combine both. And combine both in this way.
And combine both. Combine a kind of a universal and a church history approach with a philosophical approach. And I started to learn at least classical Greek for 2 semesters. And then I had to have a second modern language for my history studies. So I started to learn Spanish intensively. So this took all very long. The first 4 semesters of my studies were more or less devoted to languages. And then I decided I'm interested in Polish and Poland, and I started to study Polish as well, which is a quite complicated language, as you might know.
I agree.
And so this took much of my time at that time, but I was lucky to be free to use my time during being at the university quite freely, and I wasn't in such a rush to get to my exams. So I took the freedom to learn what I was interested in.
And you studied at the University of Hamburg?
Yes, I started up in Hamburg in 1986, and then I went to Münster, which is a university not so far away, like 3 hours away from Hamburg. So I wanted to see another university, meet different professors, but I didn't want to go too far away from Hamburg, where I had my friends and my girlfriend and so on. And then I returned to Hamburg for my exams to finish my study there, because I knew the professors there, and I think it was a good choice to do it in Hamburg.
It seems that you were quite conscious already at that stage that you should broaden your horizons academically, not only listening to one kind of lectures, but different ones. And I think it's very unusual. So there are, of course, students who go for Erasmus exchange, but in many cases it's just to see another country, and much less to actually go and consciously listen to a different way of teaching or a different approach. But you, on the other hand, actually did it quite deliberately. What motivated you to do that? Like,
I got the impression that it's kind of boring and narrow-minded to stay at one place for all of my study, but this was another time. Today, people in Europe are following the Bologna model with BA and MA, and they already have, after 2 or 3 years, their first grade, and then they go on and choose another topic. It took me like 8 years to finish my magister at that time, and so I decided it was not useful to do this all at one place. But still, there are colleagues of mine of my age who studied at 3 or 4 places during that time. So it was not so uncommon.
When you think about your studies back then, what was history teaching like? Was it something that encouraged you to continue to PhD, or it was your own motivation that despite what you've been taught, you still wanted to do it? So was it thanks to, or actually against?
No, it was thanks to. I had some really impressive teachers in all of my subjects. So people who made me concentrate on early modern history were simply because they were such good teachers. They had such interesting lectures with lots of different media and sources and so on. So this made me switch to early modern history. And
switch from what? What was the initial interest?
I had to start with all kind of topics from ancient history to modern history, everything. But I found out that early modern was the most interesting part. And so I only did 1 or 2 seminars in ancient history and medieval history, and then more or less put all my efforts into the early modern time. And at that time, I could more or less decide how to design my schedule. So I had some obligatory courses, but very few, and only in the first part of the studies, and later on in the so-called Hauptstudium, the main course of the studies, I could put all effort I wanted into the area I wanted. And so I did some Polish history, and I did, of course, I did also history of Germany in the 20th century, but I only did the obligatory courses in ancient history, although I thought it was interesting and I enjoyed doing it, but it was not my focus. And finally, I ended up to write my master's thesis in early modern history. And this.
What topic?
Yeah, it was an interesting topic, which I found by chance, so to say, because my advisor at that time was about to leave the University of Hamburg. He went to Rostock. And so and I said, I would like to write something on Reformation history, 16th century. And he said, so Hamburg is not a good idea. A colleague of mine has written a 600 pages book on the Reformation in Hamburg very recently. That's not a good idea. So and he said, where do you come from? And I said, here and there. But my parents recently moved to East Frisia. And he said, so just go to East Frisia and look if you find something there. And so did I. And I found a topic on the history of Emden, which is the main city in East Frisia. And I decided to go there and write my master's thesis on the city of Emden in the 16th century, and especially on the church council, which has written protocols, records of their meetings and what they did in their meetings. So it was very interesting and close to the sources work I could do there.
And then you finished, and the decision to go for a PhD, was it obvious one, or it took some time and reflection? What were your options that you were considering at the time when you were finishing?
Actually, I decided already while I was writing my master's thesis, which took me about a year, that I enjoy going right deep into the material, and I enjoyed focusing on one subject like this. And so I thought writing a dissertation could be a good idea. And I had no other plans, so to say. So I decided to go for that. And while I was finishing my oral exams, there was this announcement that funding could be available for my dissertation. And so I decided to apply, and I got the funding. And so I went to Göttingen for my PhD. Göttingen is also about 3 hours away from Hamburg, and it's a traditional, well-known university. And it was a good choice to have a different university for my PhD then.
When you were doing your PhD, was it already decided in your mind that you want to continue for an academic career, or you were just taking it step by step?
I was taking it step by step, and I'm still puzzled about how this all worked out in my life. I never had a master plan how to follow a career, but it was just more or less happening to me. So I got this funding in Göttingen. It was a so-called Graduiertenkolleg, so a master school for PhD students, and it was one of the first Graduiertenkollegs in Germany in the humanities. This instrument of funding many doctoral students at one time together under a kind of a framework of topic. This was all used for for natural sciences, but not for humanities at that time. And we were one of the first colleagues to be funded in the humanities, and it was called Society and Church in the Holy Roman Empire in 15th and 16th century. So we had this kind of framework, and there were art historians and German language scholars and Latinists and musicologists. So a broad variety of topics and professors. And I was writing my dissertation in the field of history, church history. And it was very good to have one church historian and one historian as a supervisor. So this was an opportunity to broaden up my perspective to other disciplines and to do my dissertation in a very structured and inspiring atmosphere. And then when the funding was over, I was forced to start to work because my parents had funded me for such a long time I couldn't go back to them. And so I started to work at the Academy of Sciences in Göttingen at a project called Inschriftenkommission, which is collecting inscriptions in houses or in all kind of materials in early modern times. And so this was very fitting to my abilities, and I really enjoyed working there. And then I was offered a position at a newly founded library again in Emden, And since I had worked on Emden, it was kind of
Good match.
yeah, it was a match or serendipity. They more or less established a position right, perfectly fitting for me, and so I went to Emden and worked there.
And that was still while writing your dissertation.
Yeah, I wasn't very fast in writing my dissertation. So when the funding, original funding was over, I hadn't written not very much, only a few chapters. And then I had to write while I was working part-time and later full-time. I had to write the dissertation. So it took me a little longer, but actually I was more effective in writing the text while I was working full-time than before, when I had all the time I wanted.
Maybe it made you more focused on finishing.
Yes,
More determined to finish.
Maybe.
And your dissertation was on Johannes Alasko, who's quite a famous Reformation figure. And you received magna cum laude for the dissertation, which is very admirable, I would say. And the supervisors were Professor Lehmann and Müller from Göttingen. But I wonder, how does the supervision, or did the supervision, go in Germany? Because for us, people from outside, we hear a lot about this very strict hierarchy and very strict relationship between the supervisors and the PhD students, a lot of distance and very little space for maneuvering between what the PhD student wants and what his or her supervisor wants. Could you tell a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was a little different with us, because we were in this Graduiertenkolleg, and this meant that it was kind of a joint thing. We were a group of young scholars, and supervision was not so focused on one person as it normally is in the German PhD system. So I had these two supervisors, but they were both not particularly focused on my works. They were supervising the whole pool of PhD students. And so I had not such a strong personal relationship with both of them. But it was, supervising was more a group effort among us PhD students. And we had seminars with our professors. We had also a colloquia where a different group of people who were writing their PhDs were gathered and meeting every other week or so. But it was not such a strong personal connection. But still, the contact with the other PhD fellows was quite intense, and I was there with a group of like 10 or 12 people at that time, and with many of them I am still in contact after 30 years. So it was a very formative era for my academic or scholarly career, being in this group of people.
I see that during your PhD studies, actually before finishing your PhD studies, which you finished in 2000, that you actually published the whole book on Alaska.
Yeah, this was kind of a side product of my dissertation. So I was writing on Johannes Alasko, and then in Emden, the Johannes Alasko Library was established, and I went there, and it was in 1999 that we were celebrating the 500th birthday of Alasko. And so I was preparing an exhibition on his life and work and career. And as a side project of this exhibition, I wrote a catalog and also small popular biography. So every research I had already put into my dissertation project was also useful for doing this work at the library. And so I could come out with 2 or even more publications on my topic before I finished my dissertation. And then the dissertation was already also printed while I was working at this library, and the library also funded the printing of the book. So it was less expensive than it could have been for me to have this book printed.
So once you finish your dissertation, you had already several publications to your name, not only articles, but also books. And what was the next step? So you were working this academy of inscriptions.
Yeah, that was the first step. And then the second step was the library in Emden. And there I was for almost 6 years. And the library was also pursuing a research program. So I had to organize conferences and edit volumes and so on. But this position ended in 2003, and I had to look for something else. And I looked for job advertisements all over Germany and was interviewed in some positions, was also interviewed for a position at Warsaw at the German Historical Institute, but this didn't work out. And for a position in Berlin. And finally, I found a new position in Mainz at the Academy of Sciences and Literature in Mainz. There was a research project on 16th century theological debates, so something I was already experienced in more or less. And so I went to Mainz. And initially it was a 2-year limited contract, but it turned out to be a long-term project with a perspective of almost 20 years. And so when we had the preliminary phase successfully ended, we were able to apply for the whole project, and it was granted. And so I knew I could stay in academia or in scholarly research for a longer time. And this was a big relief, but because I was already almost 40 when I first had a contract which lasts longer than 2 years. And like having a family, buying a house or something is not possible if you only live on very short-term contracts. So I was really lucky in this respect. I never faced any times of unemployment. One thing followed from the other, and I had sometimes I had to wonder where would be my next position, but I never faced the necessity to ponder about leaving academia and research.
I think that that's a question that many people face nowadays, especially since the job market is very poor, and it has been poor ever since, I think, 2008, from the time of the big crisis. And every year it seems to become more and more difficult for people to find those jobs. And even the number of postdoc positions seems to be decreasing every year.
Yes, I know that, and I know how much of a privilege it is that I am in this position now with a long-term contract. And I always ask myself, how did this come? And I cannot explain it. So I have no master plan, and I have no advice for somebody to try the same as I did, because it was pure luck, or however you will call it.
What I think is very interesting about your academic path is that you, in fact, from what is on your CV, you only were teaching. On one occasion, it was
In Frankfurt, yes.
In Frankfurt, yeah. Because I think a lot of people go for any possible job, so teaching one course here, one course there, doing some project here, some project there, but you somehow managed to avoid the teaching part. Was it a conscious decision, or it was just because the positions that you found available were not included in teaching?
I did not avoid teaching, but in the positions where I was working in research institutions like the Academy of Sciences and also at this research library, there was no obligation to teach. And when I arrived at my nowadays position at the Institute of European History in Mainz, there was no obligation again, but the opportunity to teach. And so I started to do teaching in Frankfurt, and I enjoyed doing it, but it was a kind of a luxury thing for me. It was besides my normal work as a researcher, I was enjoying to teach. But then I married and our son was born, and I decided teaching is not so important for me, and it takes quite a lot of time and preparation, and so I decided to stop it. I think the background of me starting to teach was that my boss was hoping I could become a professor one day, and this requires in Germany a thing called habilitation, so a kind of a second book, and also it requires to have teaching experience. That's for sure. So she more or less poked me. Irene Dingel. She poked me to acquire this teaching experience, but I wasn't so keen to become a professor. So I decided what I was doing in this research projects is the right thing for me to do. And I did not want to go the risky path of becoming a professor, which was quite a luxury to that I was able to decide that, because many people who decide to become professors don't have the choice not to, but they're more or less it's for them the only opportunity they have to stay in academia. And for me, this one was not the case.
I think it's also an interesting point to reflect on this particular career of being purely researcher, and in a way it gives a lot of freedom and a lot of possibility to engage in much deeper research than you would do if you were teaching. And if you were teaching 10 courses or 12 courses a year, as some people actually do. I don't know what's the standards in Germany for a full-time job at the university, but here in Poland, for example, it's a lot of teaching. And probably the results that you're bringing might be different than people who have to teach more. Do you see that you manage to publish more than university people if you compare your own production?
Production-wise, I cannot say that in general. I mean, I have published some articles and things, but being in a position at a research institute also means lots of administrative stuff. You have to write applications for funding, and so much time goes in there, but not being forced to teach 4 courses a week is really a luxury position. I know that. So in comparison, I might have more opportunities to publish than people who have to teach. But if I look at my fellow colleagues from this Graduiertenkolleg, many of them, some of them became professors, and many others worked now in academic institutions other than universities. So at the Academy of Sciences, at big libraries, many have become archivists, or at research libraries, which have holdings and which offer opportunity to do research. Some have become honorary professors, so they are have possibility to teach, but it's not their main job. So there are in Germany at least some positions, so to say, below the level of being a full professor, in working in academia and in research without being forced to teach all the time.
When I think about your position in the Leibniz Institute for European History, and well, you are not teaching, but then I think part of your job, I don't know if it's probably not an official part, but the realistic part of your job is that you're mentoring quite a large number of fellows who come to the Institute every year. PhD students, mostly some postdocs, like I was back in the day. And perhaps it's even a better substitution in this case for teaching, because you have this contact with young scholars, and you bring something to them of your own research experience, which is valuable.
Yeah,
because
actually,
yeah.
Actually, it is part of my contract. I think like 20% of my contract is devoting my time to our fellows. And it takes also a lot of time. And I agree, it's a very rewarding and pleasant work. It's really fun to get into contact. We have fellows from all over the world, from not only from Europe, but many from the Americas and from Asia as well. And recently we have some from Africa as well. So we have young scholars, gifted scholars who come to Germany with their projects and new approaches, and being in contact with this cutting-edge research is really, really a pleasure. And my contribution depends on what they want from me. So if I'm mentoring, but I'm just offering a mentorship, I'm not forcing it on them. So if someone is coming and enjoys talking to me, I'm open to it. But if someone is coming just to finish the dissertation and sit in the library all day, that's fine with me too. So when it's a very pleasant and open way. But we live in our institute in. Some people have compared it to a cloister because it's kind of a closed atmosphere. People are living closely together on 2 floors and working in the same building as we researchers do. And we have a fine garden where we can meet in the summer. So it's a nice, productive atmosphere. And as far as I can, I try to contribute to that. And I have, established many academic connections, but even really friendships with people who came to Mainz and, stayed in academia and stayed in contact with us.
My final question would be, what are your plans for the future?
Oh, plans for the future. That's we are in the phase in our institute right now in restructuring the organization of the institute, and so we are supposed to make plans for 5 or 6 years, kind of a program, what we are going to do. And I am I'm in the process of writing the papers about our plans for the future.
So my question came exactly at the right moment.
Yeah, or maybe a little too early, because all these plans have not been approved. So, and I have no idea what of it will be possible to realize, and so it's part of the attractiveness of my position right now, that I am able to define my own topics and to focus on things I am interested in, and in connection with my colleagues define a research program. And so we are in this process right now, and my next projects will focus, among others, on early modern sermons again, which is something which I already did in the years before, but now I want to take a different approach to this material. And I'm continuing my research on early modern peace processes. I recently finished a project which was funded by the European Commission about peace education for teenagers, and maybe we will continue in this area as well. So this is more of applied history and not historical research in the strongest sense of the word, but I enjoyed doing this, and I'm thinking of continuing this work as well.
Thank you very much for sharing your life experience and career experience with me and with our listeners. And I wish you a lot of success in this preparation of your next steps within the Institute.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.